There are betrayals we fear, and then there are betrayals we never see coming. For Railen Marshall, life was simple, steady, secure, until a single doctor's visit turned her world upside down. She'd walked into that hospital expecting reassurance, maybe a prescription, a routine checkup to ease her mind. But what she walked out with was something that would haunt her forever. HIV. 3 letters that struck like a knife. Railen could hardly breathe as the doctor's words sank in, each one tightening the vice of disbelief around her heart. She sat there, staring into a void of questions with no answers, trying to make sense of a nightmare that had somehow become her reality. She was faithful, she was devoted, and yet she was infected. How? Days passed, tests piled up, and each result only confirmed the unthinkable. The truth clawed at her, a relentless ache that wouldn't let go. She tried to silence the whisper in her mind, the one pointing toward the unlikeliest of places. She didn't want to believe it, but there was only one person who could have brought this shadow into her life. Her husband. Could it be true? Could Omari, the man she trusted with her life, the man she had vowed to stand by, have been living a lie all along? Could he be hiding something so dark, so twisted, that it would leave her life in ruins? What would you do if the person you loved most became the source of your deepest fear? If the one you trusted blindly shattered your world in ways you never thought possible? As Railen uncovered the truth, each answer would cut deeper than the last. This is Ruthless Realities. Thank you for your support as we continue to grow and bring you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. To understand the devastation that Railen Marshall faced, we have to go back to when love was simple, trust was unbroken, and the idea of betrayal was the farthest thing from her mind. Railen was, by all accounts, the kind of woman anyone would feel lucky to have in their life. Compassionate, grounded, and unwavering in her loyalty. She gave herself fully to her marriage, her family, and her career. A social worker by profession, she had spent years helping others find strength in the darkest corners of their lives. Her empathy was her calling, and her strength came from an unshakable belief in goodness, in honesty, and in love. She was the type of person who gave not because she had to, but because it was simply who she was. Railen had dreams. They weren't grand or out of reach. They were humble and true. She dreamed of a life filled with purpose, a family she could cherish and build memories with, a husband by her side who would stand with her through every storm. She believed in love, not the kind of love you see in movies, but a quiet, steady love that's built on respect and trust. She wanted a partner who shared her values, her commitment, her loyalty. And for a while, she thought she had found that in Omari. It was love at first sight, unexpectedly, almost as if fate had a hand in it. Railen was attending a fundraiser event for a local community center. As she made her way through the room, shaking hands, smiling, greeting faces she barely knew, her gaze fell on him. Omari stood out, tall, confident, with an easy smile that could disarm anyone. He was charismatic, yes, but there was something more, a warmth in his eyes, a gentleness that made her feel instantly at ease. He introduced himself with a firm handshake, and in that moment, Railen felt something shift, a quiet sense of belonging she couldn't explain. Omari was the kind of man who could light up any room. In his work as a corporate executive, he had built a reputation not just for his skill, but for his charm. People gravitated to him, admired him, and often envied him. He was a man with presence, a man who seemed to have it all: success, respect, influence. But behind that confident exterior was a quiet storm, a well-kept vault of insecurities that he kept buried deep within himself. Omari's world was built on appearances, on the image he had carefully crafted and guarded. Beneath his polished surface lay desires he dared not reveal, shadows he kept hidden even from himself. He had grown up with expectations, family expectations, cultural expectations, and his own belief in what it meant to be a successful man. He followed the path set before him, built his life on discipline and ambition, and achieved everything he was opposed to. But some desires don't fade. They live within us, waiting, biding their time. For a while with Railen, he believed he could be everything she wanted him to be. He told himself that with her love, he could suppress the part of himself he feared the most. And for the first years of their marriage, that was enough. They were happy, at least on the surface. They built a life that looked perfect to everyone around them. A home filled with laughter, shared goals, quiet nights spent dreaming of a family they would one day raise together. But then there was someone else, Cameron Lore. Cameron was Omari's boss, a man whose presence loomed large, both in the office and in Omari's life. He was the type of man who commanded respect without ever asking for it. Authoritative, wealthy, incredibly well-connected. Cameron was a figure of power and influence, someone who had built his empire from the ground up. People often said he was as charming as he was ruthless, that he could make or break careers with a single decision. And for Omari, that power was intoxicating. There was something magnetic about Cameron, a pull that went beyond admiration or respect. He had a way of getting under people's skin, of blurring the lines between professional and personal. He was the kind of man who could see through people, who knew how to exploit their desires, their insecurities. Cameron was not only Omari's boss. He was a force in Omari's life, a complex influence that would lead Omari down a path he hadn't intended to take. As Railen and Omari moved forward in their marriage, those early days of laughter and shared dreams began to fade. Omari became more distant. His attention pulled in directions Railen didn't understand. She attributed it to his job, the demands of his career, the pressure of success. She reminded herself their love was built on trust, that sometimes life gets hard, but they would make it through. After all, marriage was a commitment, a promise to stand by each other through thick and thin. Railen held on to that trust as if it were the very foundation of her life. She told herself that her loyalty would be enough, that her quiet support would bridge any gap that had grown between them. She worked longer hours, trying to fill the silence that had crept into their home. She buried herself in the lives of others, in the problems of the families she served, hoping that by helping them, she might find a way to bring her own family back together. But some things can't be fixed with love alone. And in the shadows of her husband's life, something else was unfolding. Something Railen would never have suspected. While she fought to keep their marriage alive, Omari was slipping further away, drawn into a world she couldn't see, tied to a man she didn't know. Railen was faithful to her last breath, believing that their marriage, their love, was worth the fight. But as she would soon discover, sometimes trust is not enough. It began with something so small, so easy to ignore, a lingering exhaustion that settled into Railen's bones. At first, she brushed it off as a toll of her long work hours. After all, she'd been putting in extra time, handling cases that pulled at her heart and drained her energy. Fatigue wasn't unusual for Railen, and she chalked it up to life, to the pressures of her job, to the endless demand that came with helping others. But as the days turned into weeks, the fatigue grew into something heavier, something darker. Her body felt weighed down. Her joints ached, and a dull headache settled at the base of her skull, refusing to let up. She began losing her appetite, pushing away meals that once brought her comfort. Even her favorite food seemed tasteless, like shadows of the flavors she used to enjoy. Soon, she found herself waking up each morning feeling just as tired as when she went to bed, a kind of weariness that sleep could not shake. Railen tried to push through it. She told herself it was just stress, that she needed to take better care of herself. She threw herself into remedies she hoped would help. Long baths, herbal teas, stolen moments of rest whenever she could manage. She even took up morning walks, hoping the fresh air might ease the fatigue that clung to her. But nothing helped. Instead, the exhaustion grew deeper, her body growing weaker with each passing day. Concerned but hesitant to worry anyone, she kept these feelings to herself. She didn't want Omari to see her as fragile or needy. In her heart, she felt a sense of duty to remain strong, to be the supportive wife who didn't complain, who didn't add to the burden of his already stressful life. She told herself it would pass, that she just needed to power through. But then came a morning, a moment that shattered the illusion. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw something she could no longer ignore. Her skin was pale, her eyes dull, and she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. The wave of it all hit her, a fear creeping into her thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, this was more than stress. It was a thought she didn't want to entertain, a whisper she wanted to silence, but it had grown too loud to ignore. Finally, Railen made the decision to see a doctor. She put on her bravest face as she walked into that clinic, hoping the doctor would tell her what she'd been telling herself all along, that she simply needed a break, some rest, maybe a change of pace. She watched the doctor's expression as he took her blood, a look of calm professionalism that only heightened her sense of dread. A few days later, she received a call asking her to return for the results. Sitting in that sterile room, Railen felt her heart pound as the doctor entered with a somber expression. She braced herself, clinging to hope, but when he spoke, his words cut through her like shards of glass. "Railen, you've tested positive for HIV." The room spun, her thoughts scattered in 1,000 directions, each one more terrifying than the last. She sat there, numb, unable to process the weight of those words. Her mind raced through every moment, every memory, every interaction that could possibly explain this nightmare. She was always... How could this happen? The doctor's voice faded into background as her world came crashing down around her. She clung to a thread of disbelief, telling herself that this had to be a mistake, some terrible error in the lab. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't. Determined to prove it wrong, Railen went to another hospital, submitted herself to another round of tests, hoping, praying, that somehow this second test would clear her of this horrifying diagnosis. But days later, she was given the same result. Positive. A third hospital. Another round of tests. The answer was always the same. Each result felt like a sledgehammer to her heart, chipping away at her last sliver of hope, forcing her to confront a truth she could barely bring herself to believe. She had HIV. It was real, and yet she couldn't understand how. The questions flooded her mind, each one more painful than the last. She hadn't been with anyone but her husband. She had never strayed, never taken a single risk. Her life had been marked by fidelity, by loyalty, by a commitment to the very values she believed would protect her. So how could this be happening? In the dark silence of those nights, Railen lay awake, her mind swirling with fears and doubts she had never allowed herself to consider. The pieces weren't adding up. Every explanation she tried to find fell apart under the weight of the truth, leading her back to one terrifying, impossible question. Could it be Omari? The thought struck her with a force that left her breathless. She wanted to dismiss it, to tell herself that it was an unfounded suspicion, a cruel twist of her own imagination. But as she lay there, alone with her thoughts, the whispers grew louder, refusing to let her go. How could she ask him? How could she voice a question that would shake the very foundation of their marriage? What if it wasn't him? Would he think she had been unfaithful? Would he turn the blame on her? Accuse her of betrayal? The doubts gnawed at her, each one twisting the knife deeper. With each test result, each confirmation, the impossible began to feel inevitable. And Railen knew deep down that there was only one way to find the answer she dreaded. She would have to look for herself. She would have to uncover the truth, even if it meant discovering a darkness she wasn't ready to face. Railen had always trusted Omari. In all their years together, she never once questioned his loyalty. She prided herself on being the type of wife who trusted without hesitation, who believed in the strength of their bond. Her love for him had always been unwavering. She'd built their life around that foundation. The thought of snooping, of crossing a boundary she'd always respected, felt foreign and wrong. But now, doubt was a steady thrum in her mind, growing louder each day. Every time she looked at Omari, a shadow crept into her heart. She wanted to push it away, to remind herself that he was the man she had chosen, the man she had shared her dreams with. But the question lingered, gnawing at her with a force she couldn't silence. Could he have betrayed her? Could the unthinkable really be true? Raylan's days became a haze of conflicting emotions. She'd catch herself lost in thought, feeling the weight of shame pressing down on her, her chest tight with guilt. She felt as though even considering this was a betrayal of her own, a betrayal of the love they had shared, of the life they had built. She hated herself for it. She hated the way doubt crept into her heart, wrapping around her thoughts, refusing to let go. Am I losing my mind? She wondered, her thoughts racing through every memory, every moment that once felt so secure. She remembered the quiet nights they'd spent together, the laughter, the warmth of his touch, the small gestures that had made her feel loved. How could any of it have been a lie? How could he be capable of hiding something so monstrous? But then, the fear would creep back in, quiet but unrelenting. The unshakable truth of her diagnosis sat heavy within her, a constant reminder that something, somewhere, had gone terribly wrong. She thought of the hospitals, the endless tests, the doctors' voices, each one confirming the reality she couldn't escape. And each time, her mind circled back to the only possibility that made sense. What if she was wrong? What if he hadn't betrayed her? And this was all just some terrible mistake? She knew him. Omari would be devastated to know she had even considered this, that she could doubt him so deeply. He was her husband, her partner, the man she'd promised to trust through everything. And yet, the shadow of suspicion loomed too large to ignore. The thought of investigating him, of invading his privacy, felt wrong. She had always believed in honesty, in respecting each other's boundaries. But now, desperation overpowered shame. She felt like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff, caught between her loyalty and the horrifying suspicion that he was hiding something. She didn't want to cross that line. But every day, every unanswered question pushed her closer. One night, unable to sleep, Railen sat up in bed and looked at Omari's phone on the nightstand. It was right there, so close, yet the mere thought of touching it made her heart race with guilt. She could feel her pulse quicken, her palms grow cold. She wanted to believe in him, to believe that he was innocent, that her fears were baseless. But the image of those test results haunted her, an unrelenting reminder of the truth she couldn't deny. That night, Omari came home late, his face etched with exhaustion. He barely glanced in Railen's direction as he walked in, his body slumped, moving like a man carrying invisible burdens. She watched him silently, the unspoken questions burning in her mind. But she held her tongue. He muttered a tired goodnight, made his way to the bathroom, and soon returned to their bed, collapsing onto the mattress with a sigh. Within minutes, he was asleep, his breathing deep and steady, oblivious to the turmoil that consumed her. Railen lay beside him, wide awake, the cold fingers of doubt wrapping tighter around her heart. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning, torn between trust and suspicion. But tonight, she couldn't ignore it. She needed answers. She had to know. Slowly. Her gaze drifted to his phone on the nightstand. She knew it was wrong. She knew that the simple act of reaching for his phone would cross a line she'd sworn she'd never cross. But as her mind replayed the endless doctor's visits, the test results, the diagnosis that had shattered her world, a force stronger than guilt pushed her forward. With trembling hands, she reached over, gently picked up his phone, and held it close to his hand. She took a deep breath, her pulse racing. As she pressed his thumb to the screen, unlocking it, Omari stirred for a moment, his body shifting. But he didn't wake. He was too exhausted to notice. The screen lit up, and she stared down at it, her heart pounding, as she navigated to his WhatsApp messages. She swallowed, her throat tight, as she braced herself for what she might find. The first few chats were names she recognized. Friends, family, colleagues. But then, just below those familiar names, her eyes fell on a contact saved as Sugar, her breath caught in her throat, her heart skipping a beat. Sugar, she whispered to herself, the name echoing in her mind. That wasn't her, and it wasn't a nickname she'd ever heard him use. With a sense of dread pooling in her stomach, she tapped on the chat. What she saw next made her blood run cold. The profile picture was unmistakable. Cameron Lattimore, Omari's boss. She felt a chill spread through her body, an electric current of shock that left her frozen, staring at the screen in disbelief. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. each line hitting her like a physical blow. She read words that twisted her stomach, messages that painted a picture she couldn't bear to see, photos, videos, each one more explicit than the last, showing a side of Omari she had never known, messages filled with intimate promises, flirtations, and something darker, something she'd never imagined in her wildest nightmares. One message stood out, the words searing into her mind. "I can't wait to be in you." Raylen's hands went numb, her vision blurred with tears she hadn't even realized were forming. She read on, the lines between Omari and Cameron becoming more intimate, more brazen. A twisted world, hidden just beneath the surface of the life she thought she knew. There were emojis, vulgar jokes, messages hinting at secret encounters, each one a stab of betrayal that tore deeper into her heart. "You might be my boss at the office." Another message read, "But I'm the boss after hours." A string of suggestive emojis followed. The casual intimacy in their exchange chilled her to the core. Railen couldn't breathe. She felt as if the ground had been pulled from under her. Her reality shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The weight of the betrayal, the magnitude of the lies, pressed down on her chest, leaving her gasping for air. She looked at Omari's sleeping form, peaceful, oblivious, while her own world was crumbling. How could he, the man she had loved so deeply, trusted so blindly, was leading a double life? And worse, he had brought this darkness into her own body, leaving her to bear the consequences of his betrayal. The messages, the images, the reality of it all swirled in her mind, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. The man she had shared her life with, the one she had vowed to stand beside, had been lying to her all along. And now as she sat there, the truth laid bare before her, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. As she read on, her mind circled back to all the times she'd made excuses. For Omari's late nights, his exhaustion, his sudden lack of interest in intimacy. She had tried so hard to be understanding, to support him as a loving, patient wife. She had stifled her own needs, holding back her desires to give him space. She had been the responsible one, the understanding one, a wife who never complained. But now she realized the bitter truth. All this time, while she'd been trying to be patient and supportive, Omari had been giving himself to someone else. And not just anyone. His boss, the man who held power over his career, his decisions, his very life. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than she could have imagined. A twisted deception that left her feeling hollow and broken. A fresh wave of anger washed over her as the realization sank in. Not only had Omari betrayed her trust, but he had brought back a virus that would alter the course of her life forever. A disease that would bind her to medication for the rest of her days. She, who had always avoided even the smallest pills, now faced a future of doctors, treatments, and a daily reminder of the life-altering mistake he had made. Her hands shook as she reached the phone again, needing to see more, needing to confirm that this was real, that this was her reality. She saved every piece of evidence she found. Screenshots of the messages, the photos, the incriminating exchanges. Then, with a bitter resolve, she deleted the images from his phone, wiped any trace that she had seen them. She slipped out of WhatsApp, locked the phone, and placed it back on the nightstand, as if it were a ticking bomb. As Omari slept peacefully beside her, Railen sat in the darkness, her mind racing with questions, with anger, with a helpless sorrow that felt like it might swallow her whole. She had done everything right. She had loved him, supported him, trusted him. And this was a reward? "Why me?" she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible, her heart heavy with despair. She had been a good wife, a faithful partner, someone who had given her all to a marriage she thought was built on honesty and respect. And yet, here she was, betrayed, infected, left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered beyond repair. She couldn't see a way forward. The weight of the betrayal, the depth of the deceit, left her feeling trapped, paralyzed by a future she had never anticipated. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Railen sat in silence, her mind lost in the devastation that Omari had left in his wake. She had no idea what she would do next, only that she could never look at him the same way again. The next morning, Railen sat at the kitchen table, a letter folded neatly in front of her. Her hands were steady, her gaze hard. As she stared at the paper, the words she had written a reflection of the broken trust, the anger, and the heartbreak she could no longer keep to herself. She had spent the night in silence, replaying the messages, the images, the lies that had shattered her world. And now she was ready for the truth. As Omari entered the kitchen, she looked up, meeting his gaze with a cold intensity that left him shifting uncomfortably. He sensed something was wrong, but moved toward her with his usual composure, as if the betrayal she'd uncovered hadn't happened, as if the life they had shared hadn't been destroyed by his secrets. Without a word, Railen slid the letter across the table, watching as Omari hesitated, his brow furrowing as he took the paper. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the lines, the shock and confusion flickering across his face as he read her words. He looked up, his face pale, his mouth opening to say something, but the words seemed to die on his lips. "Railen, how could you do this to me?" Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay a current of pain, anger, and disbelief. "I trusted you, Omari. I loved you, and this is what I get in return." Omari stared at her, his face tightening as he forced a look of innocence. "Railen, I don't know what you're talking about. You're not making any sense." She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she held his gaze. "I know, Omari. I know about you and Cameron. I know everything. And I know that you gave me HIV. He flinched. His expression shifted from confusion to something darker, but he quickly masked it, his voice hardening. "Railen, this is ridiculous. I don't know where you're getting these ideas. But whatever you think you know, it's not true." Railen reached into her bag, pulling out her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled to the saved screenshots. She placed the phone in front of him, the messages, the pictures, staring back at him, undeniable proof of his lies. For a moment, Omari sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face expressionless. She waited for a reaction, for an apology, for some sign of remorse. But instead, he pushed the phone back toward her, his jaw clenched, his voice cold. "So what? You're going to throw this in my face now?" You went through my phone. The calmness of his tone, the lack of any emotion, struck her like a slap. "This is your response," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You infected me. Omari, you betrayed me. You brought this into my life. And you don't even care." Omari looked away, his eyes hardening as he stood up, straightening his suit jacket. "I don't have time for this, Railen. I have to get to work." "Railen, you don't have time for this? For me?" The words tumbled out of her, a wave of rage and pain she could no longer contain. "You have time to sleep with your boss? To risk everything we built? To destroy my life? But you don't have time to even face what you've done." Omari paused, his gaze meeting hers for a lingering moment, his expression unreadable. He exhaled slowly, the faintest hint of frustration crossing his face, as if her pain were nothing more than an inconvenience. "I don't know what you expect me to say," he replied coldly. "I made a mistake. We'll talk about this when I get back." And with that, he turned, grabbed his keys, his briefcase, and walked out the door without a backward glance. Railen sat there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, watching as the man she had loved so deeply, the man she had trusted with everything, left her in silence, as though she were nothing, as though their life meant nothing. She felt the depth of his betrayal settle over her, a hollow ache that would not go away. To understand the depth of Omari's betrayal, we have to go back to the beginning, the moment his loyalty first started to crack, the moment his life split into two. It started innocently enough, or so he told himself. Omari was ambitious, driven, a man with dreams of rising in his career. And Cameron Lattimore, his boss, was the key to that success. Cameron was known for his influence, his connections, and the way he could turn someone's career around with a single nod of approval. To Omari, he was both a mentor and a figure of admiration, someone who embodied the kind of success Omari wanted to achieve. At first, it was just late-night meetings, drinks after work, Cameron sharing stories of his life and achievements, slowly drawing Omari into his world. Cameron had a magnetic pull, an energy that Omari found hard to resist. When Cameron spoke, people listened. When he commanded, they followed. Omari was no exception. But as the weeks went by, Omari began to notice gradual shifts in their interactions. Small gestures, lingering glances, compliments that felt a bit too personal, too intimate. Cameron would place a hand on Omari's shoulder, a touch that lingered just a second too long, or stand close enough that Omari could feel his presence, in a way that was almost intentional. At first, Omari dismissed these moments, telling himself they were nothing, that he was reading too much into it. But deep down, he felt the pull, the thrill of something forbidden. He would catch himself wondering what it all meant, why his heart would race whenever Cameron was near. And each time, he'd push the thoughts away, burying them beneath layers of denial and self-justification. Then, one evening after a long day at the office, Cameron invited Omari out for a drink. They sat in a dimly lit bar, their conversation slipping from work into something deeper, something more personal. Cameron shared stories of his own struggles, his secrets, his loneliness, opening a door that Omari hadn't realized was there. Omari felt seen, understood, in a way he hadn't felt in years. And before he knew it, he was opening up too, revealing parts of himself he had kept hidden even from Railen. As the night wore on, the air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. Omari could feel the magnetic pull, a force he couldn't deny. And in that moment, all his boundaries blurred. Cameron leaned in, his hand resting on Omari's, his voice low, his gaze intense. "You don't have to hide with me," he murmured, a promise wrapped in a whisper. Omari's heart raced, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. But in that instant, he felt a kind of freedom he hadn't known before. He knew it was wrong. He knew he was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But the allure of something different, something powerful, was stronger than his guilt. And so, he let himself fall. What started as a single night soon spiraled into something more. Omari found himself sneaking away during lunch breaks, staying late at the office, inventing excuses to be with Cameron. Their encounters became routine, a hidden life he balanced alongside the one he shared with Railen. He told himself he could keep it separate, that it was harmless, that what Railen didn't know couldn't hurt her. But the truth was, Cameron's influence over Omari was deeper than he wanted to admit. Cameron had a way of drawing him in, of making him feel powerful, desired, special. He used his position, his authority, his wealth to keep Omari close, to remind him of the rewards that came with loyalty. Omari knew that his career, his future, even his financial security, were tied to Cameron. And in moments of doubt, he would tell himself that he was simply doing what he had to, that everyone made compromises, that this was just another way to secure his place in the world. As their relationship deepened, Omari's justifications grew. He told himself that he was still a good husband, that his love for Railen hadn't changed. In his mind, his affair with Cameron was separate, a piece of himself that he kept hidden but didn't let affect his marriage. He convinced himself that he could continue to live this double life, that he was in control, that no one would ever have to know. But the truth was, Omari's life had become a web of lies. Each thread tangled with the next, each deception more dangerous than the last. And as he sank deeper into his hidden world with Cameron, he became blinded to the damage he was causing, to the destruction that waited on the other side of his secrets. In Omari's mind, he was still the same man he had always been, a devoted husband, a successful professional, a man who could balance the pieces of his life without consequence. But as he would soon discover, some lies have a way of unraveling all on their own. As she sat alone one afternoon, too numb to cry, her gaze drifted to Omari's work locker in their closet, a place he guarded, a space she had always respected. But now, with her heart broken and her trust obliterated, she reached for the handle, driven by a need to uncover whatever other secrets he had kept from her. She opened it, her hands trembling, and there, nestled among his belongings, she found the small, unmistakable bottle of medication. She held it in her hands, her fingers tracing over the label. The name of the antiviral drug staring back at her like a dark reminder of everything she had lost. This was it. This was the evidence of his deceit, a final confirmation of how deeply he had betrayed her. The pill bottle became a symbol in her mind, a representation of the disease he had brought into her life, a disease that she would carry forever, a shadow that would linger over her every day, a constant reminder of his lies. Her own reflection in the mirror looked foreign now, hollowed by despair, by the weight of something she hadn't chosen, but would be forced to live with for the rest of her life. As she clutched the medication in her hands, her thoughts spiraled, sinking into the depths of her pain and helplessness. This was her reality now, a life punctuated by pills, by treatments, by the knowledge that her health, her future, her very existence had been altered by his selfishness. She had always hated taking medication, had always been careful, cautious. And now, thanks to him, her body would become a vessel for a disease that would never leave, that would haunt her with every pill, every doctor's appointment, every whispered thought in the dead of night. Her mind filled with questions she knew would never have answers. Why had he done this? Why had he risked everything? Their love, their life together, just to fulfill his hidden desires. And how could he have been so careless, so heartless, as to infect her, to leave her with a burden she hadn't chosen? In that moment, Railen felt the weight of her helplessness, a sense of betrayal so profound it left her breathless. She had always believed that love could overcome anything, that loyalty would keep them safe. But now she saw the truth. Love could be shattered, loyalty could be destroyed, and trust could be erased with a single act of selfishness. As she placed the medication back in the locker, she felt a coldness settle over her, a hardness born from pain and betrayal. She didn't know what she would do next. But one thing was clear. Her life, her future, would never be the same again. Railen knew there was no turning back. She had to confront him, to look him in the eyes and demand answers to the questions that had haunted her since her discovery. She had spent days piecing together the fragments of her life, every memory tainted by betrayal, every promise broken. Now, standing in their living room, she waited for Omari to return, her heart steel with resolve born from pain. As Omari walked through the door, he froze, seeing her there, waiting. There was something in her gaze, a fire he hadn't seen before, a strength fueled by anger and a grief he could never fully understand. She met his eyes, her voice steady but laced with the weight of all she had endured. "Railen? Why?" Omari asked, uncertain. "Why did you do it?" she demanded. Omari shifted uncomfortably, his expression hardening as he realized the gravity of her words. "Railen, this isn't the time." "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp, unwavering. "This is the time. I need to know why you betrayed me, why you chose him over us." Her voice cracked, but she held her ground, her gaze locked on him, demanding the truth. Omari looked away, his jaw tense, his face expressionless. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something, remorse, guilt, maybe even shame. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a cold detachment that cut her to the core. "And why didn't you tell me?" she pressed, holding up the pill bottle she had found in his locker, her hand trembling. You knew you were sick. You knew you were infected. And you never told me. Why, Omari? Why would you keep something like this from me?" Omari's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "I did want you to know," he said finally, his voice quiet but laced with irritation, as if her pain was nothing more than an inconvenience. "I didn't want you asking questions. I didn't want you finding out about him." Raylan's breath caught in her throat, the full weight of his words settling over her like a crushing wave. "You were willing to let me suffer, to let me get sick, just to keep your affairs secret?" Her voice broke, her heart shattering as she realized the depth of his selfishness, the complete, disregard he had shown for her life. Omari looked at her, his expression impassive, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. I never wanted this to happen, Railen. I didn't plan for any of it to turn out like this. But I had to protect my career, my reputation. You wouldn't understand. I wouldn't understand, she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. I was your wife, Omari. I loved you. I trusted you with my life. And you threw it all away for what? A secret life you thought you could hide forever. Omari's face twisted in irritation, his voice growing colder, sharper. You don't get it, Railen. My life, my career, none of that would have survived if people knew. I couldn't risk everything for a mistake. The word hung in the air, cutting through her like a knife. A mistake. That's what he called it. A mistake that cost her health, her future, her very sense of self. Her heart clenched, the pain giving way to a rage that burned deep, consuming every part of her that had once loved him. Railen, you think this was just a mistake? Her voice was low, trembling with the weight of her anger, her despair. You lied to me. You risked my life. And you have the nerve to call it a mistake? This was my life. Omari, my health, my future. And you threw it away without a second thought. Omari looked at her, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. But he quickly shrugged it off, his expression hardening. I did what I had to do, he said coldly. I didn't want to hurt you, but I had to protect myself. Raylan's heart twisted, her breath catching as the full extent of his selfishness became clear. He had never thought about her, her pain, her future. Every decision he had made was rooted in his own self-interest, his own need to protect the life he had built for himself. She felt a hollow ache settle in her chest, the last remnants of love she had clung to now replaced by a darkness she couldn't escape. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy with the weight of all that had been broken, all that could never be mended. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. I hope you're happy, Omari. I hope whatever you gained from this was worth everything you destroyed. And with that, she turned away, her heart heavy, knowing that whatever she had once believed in was gone forever. The room was filled with a thick, suffocating silence, punctuated only by the shallow breaths Railen took as she watched Omari's cold, unfeeling expression, his detachment, his indifference to the devastation he'd caused, fanned the flames of a rage that had been simmering in her since the moment she'd uncovered his betrayal. The man standing before her was a stranger, a heartless shell of the husband she had once loved. She felt the weight of everything he had taken from her, her health, her future, her very sense of safety. The pain twisted inside her, building into something dark, something that demanded release. Her gaze shifted, falling on the small drawer beside her, the place where she had hidden the gun Omari had insisted on keeping in the house. She'd never touched it before, never even thought of it as more than a locked-away object in the quiet corners of their lives. But now, in this moment, it felt like the only way to make him understand the depth of her pain. In a haze of heartbreak and betrayal, Railen reached for the gun, her fingers closing around the cold metal as her mind clouded with memories of the life they had shared, the dreams they had once built together. Her hands shook, her body trembling with the weight of all she had lost. She looked at him, meeting his unfeeling gaze, and felt something inside her snap. Without thinking, without planning, she lifted the gun, the barrel pointed directly at the man who had destroyed her life. And then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, her finger pressed down on the trigger. The sound of the gunshot tore through the silence, echoing through the room, each beat reverberating in her ears like a heartbeat. And then nothing. A heavy, deafening silence settled over the room. Railen stood frozen, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her chest as she looked at Omari's lifeless body slumped over, unmoving. The reality of what she had done washed over her in a cold, unrelenting wave, her mind struggling to grasp the finality of her actions. The gun fell from her hand, clattering to the floor as her body went numb, the weight of her decision sinking into her bones. She had crossed a line she could never return from, a line that had forever altered the course of her life. In her rage, her pain, she had taken justice into her own hands. And now there was no going back. She stumbled back, her knees giving way as she sank to the floor, her hands covered her mouth as sobs racked her body. The gravity of her actions bore down on her, each breath heavy, filled with the knowledge that she had become something she never thought she could be. In that moment, she felt the weight of her own guilt, the crushing realization that she had chosen a path she could never escape. The betrayal, the lies, the anger, they had consumed her, twisted her into someone she no longer recognized. And now there was nothing left but silence and the terrible, irreversible truth of what she had done. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone, dialing 911. Her voice choked with tears as she spoke, confessing the crime that had torn her life apart. As she waited for the authorities, she sat in the quiet of her broken home, her mind numb, her heart hollow. She had wanted justice. She had wanted him to feel the depth of her pain. But now, as she sat in the emptiness, she realized the true cost of her decision. There was no freedom in revenge, only an endless silence echoing with the consequences of a love that had died long ago. The morning of Railen's arrest was cold and gray, the sun barely breaking through the clouds as police cars lined the street in front of her house. She watched from the doorway, numb, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. When the officers let her out in handcuffs, her neighbors watched in stunned silence, some whispering, others shaking their heads, unable to reconcile the image of the quiet, kind woman they knew of the crime she was accused of committing. As she sat in the back of the patrol car, staring out the window, the reality of her actions settled over her like a crushing weight. She had pulled the trigger. She had ended his life. And now she was alone, left to face the consequences of a decision she could never undo. The months leading up to her trial were a blur of court dates, legal meetings, and psychiatric evaluations. Railen spent countless hours with her defense attorney, recounting every detail of her marriage, every moment that had led her to that final confrontation. She found herself reliving the heartbreak, the betrayal, the slow descent into despair as she had discovered Omari's affair, the disease he had brought into her life, and the lies he had woven around her. When the trial finally began, the story captivated the public's attention as they debated the moral complexities of Railen's case. Was she a cold-blooded killer, or a woman driven to the edge by betrayal and heartbreak? The courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and strangers who had come to witness the drama unfold, each one eager to hear the details of a love story turned tragedy. The prosecution built a case that was clear and unforgiving. They painted Railen as a woman consumed by rage, a woman who had taken the law into her own hands, willing to kill in order to satisfy her need for revenge. They recounted the events of that fateful night, presenting the gun as evidence, emphasizing the finality of her actions. To them, it was simple. Railen had planned to kill Omari. She had waited for him, confronted him, and in a moment of rage, she had pulled the trigger. The defense, however, argued that this was more than a simple crime of passion. They laid bare the psychological torment Railen had endured, the devastating betrayal that had unraveled every aspect of her life. Her attorney described her as a loving wife, a woman who had trusted her husband completely, only to have that trust shattered in the most intimate and destructive way possible. They spoke of her diagnosis, the disease Omari had concealed from her, the deep emotional trauma that had driven her to the edge. Psychologists took the stand to explain the concept of betrayal trauma, detailing how Railen's discovery of her husband's affair and infection had led her to a breaking point. They describe how the psychological impact of such profound betrayal could distort a person's sense of reality, how the pain and helplessness could drive someone to act in ways they might otherwise never consider. The experts argued that Railen had been pushed beyond her limits, that her actions were the result of an unbearable combination of shock, fear, and anger. The courtroom listened intently, each testimony adding another layer to the story, another dimension to the tragedy. Friends and family testified to Railen's character, describing her as compassionate, loyal, a woman who had always valued kindness and integrity. They spoke of her dedication to her marriage, of the love she had once shared with Omari, and how his betrayal had shattered her sense of self. The prosecution countered by focusing on the physical evidence. Forensic experts testified about the gun, explaining how Railen had retrieved it, how the ballistics matched, how her fingerprints covered the weapon. Crime scene investigators described the chilling quiet of the room when they had arrived, the finality of her actions etched into every detail. The prosecution emphasized her choice, her decision to end Omari's life instead of seeking help or walking away. The legal proceedings brought to light every aspect of Raylen's life, every moment of her marriage, every choice that had led her to that day. As the trial wore on, the jury became visibly torn, grappling with the complexity of the case. On one hand, there was the undeniable crime, a life taken in an act of rage. On the other, there was the undeniable pain, the deep sense of betrayal that had driven Railen to the edge. When the jury finally reached a verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Railen stood, her heart pounding, as she waited to hear her fate, her mind replaying every painful moment, every choice that had led her to this point. The jury found her guilty of second-degree murder, recognizing the emotional torment that had influenced her actions, but ultimately holding her accountable for the life she had taken. The judge acknowledged the unique circumstances of her case, the betrayal that had driven her to such a dark place, but made it clear that her decision had crossed an irreversible line. Railen was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. As the sentence was announced, the courtroom sat in silence, the weight of the tragedy hanging over them, a reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden within love, trust, and loyalty. As she was led away in handcuffs, Railen felt the finality of it all settle into her bones. She had acted out of pain, out of betrayal, but now she would live with the consequences of her choices. In the end, Raylen's story is one that speaks to the devastating power of betrayal, a betrayal so deep that it shattered her trust, her health, and her very sense of self. Omari's deception didn't just end their marriage. It left wounds that would never fully heal, scars that would shape her life forever. What happens when the person we trust most becomes the source of our greatest pain? For Railen, the answer was a dark, tragic journey, one that took her to the very edges of love, loyalty, and vengeance. This story raises questions that linger long after the details have been laid bare. Was Raylen's reaction justified? Could anyone facing such profound betrayal act rationally? Or were her actions the inevitable response to an unimaginable hurt? Was there a point at which she could have walked away, taken a different path? Or was this tragedy written in the choices they both made, in secrets kept and truths withheld? The story of Railen and Omari forces us to confront the gray areas of morality, where love and pain intersect in complex ways. It challenges us to consider our own limits, our own capacity to forgive, and the choices we might make if faced with a similar betrayal. In her place, what would you have done? Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe for more true stories and reflections on the human condition. This is Ruthless Realities. Until next time.